Some people don't miss the person, they miss the distraction, the constant texts, the late night calls, the feeling that someone is there, because silence is dangerous. Silence forces you to face yourself, and most people would rather stay in the wrong relationship than sit alone with their own thoughts. That's why so many relationships today feel heavy instead of peaceful. People aren't choosing each other from wholeness, they're choosing each other from emptiness, not because they truly connect, but because they're terrified of being alone, so they settle, they tolerate disrespect, ignore red flags, shrink themselves, betray their own peace, just to avoid the silence waiting for them at night. And maybe that's the saddest part. Some people are not in love, they are just afraid of silence. The Stoics warned about this long ago. Marcus Aurelius believed that a person who cannot stand alone can never truly be free, because dependency creates fear, fear of losing someone, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of silence, and once fear enters love, love slowly turns into attachment, then attachment becomes control, and control destroys peace. This video is not about hating relationships. Love can be beautiful, but dependence quietly destroys people every single day, because if you cannot be complete alone, you will eventually lose yourself trying to keep someone else. So tonight, before you rush to fill the silence again, ask yourself honestly, do you truly miss them? Or do you simply miss not being alone? That question alone might quietly change your entire life. Most people don't fear losing love, they fear facing themselves. There's a reason so many people jump from relationship to relationship. The moment one ends, another one begins. No healing, no reflection, no silence long enough to hear themselves think, just another distraction, another attachment, another temporary escape from loneliness, and society calls this normal. But if someone cannot spend even a few months alone without panicking, that's not love, that's emotional dependence, because the truth is, most people are not searching for connection, they're searching for relief, relief from emptiness, relief from overthinking, relief from loneliness, relief from themselves. That's why they cling to people who clearly drain them. Deep down, they already know the relationship is unhealthy, the arguments never really end, the peace is gone, the emotional exhaustion keeps growing, but they stay anyway. Why? Because an unhealthy relationship still feels less terrifying than sitting alone in a quiet room with their own thoughts, and that's the tragedy. People slowly abandon themselves, just to avoid abandonment from someone else. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus taught that a person who depends on external things for peace will always suffer, and relationships become dangerous the moment they become emotional oxygen, because now, you're no longer choosing love freely, you're surviving through it. You start tolerating things you once promised yourself you never would: disrespect, manipulation, emotional games, cold behavior, half-hearted love, not because you're weak, but because fear has taken control. Fear whispers, at least you're not alone. So people sacrifice their dignity for temporary companionship, and slowly, they stop recognizing themselves. You can actually watch it happen. Someone enters a relationship full of energy, ambition, and clarity, then months later, they stop chasing their goals, stop taking care of themselves, stop thinking independently. Their mood now depends on another person's attention. One text can make their entire day, one cold reply can destroy it. That's not freedom, that's emotional captivity. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." And if your thoughts constantly revolve around fear of losing someone, your inner world slowly becomes unstable too. That's why solitude matters, not because being alone is superior, but because solitude reveals whether you actually know how to stand on your own. Can you sit in silence without reaching for distraction? Can you spend time alone without feeling incomplete? Can you enjoy your own company, without needing constant reassurance from another person? Most people never learn this, so they spend their lives chasing relationships, when what they're actually chasing is escape from stillness, escape from themselves. But eventually, life forces everyone into silence, a breakup, a lonely night, a season where nobody stays, and in that silence, you finally meet the person you've been running from your whole life, yourself. At first, it feels uncomfortable, heavy, almost unbearable. You stare at your phone, wanting to text them, even after everything, and that's when you realize something painful. Attachment does not disappear, just because someone hurt you, but if you stay in that silence long enough, something begins to change. Your mind slows down, your emotions settle, and for the first time in a long time, you begin hearing yourself again, not the version trying to be loved, the real you. And once you stop fearing your own company, you stop accepting relationships that destroy your peace just to avoid loneliness. You stop begging for attention, you stop confusing attachment with love, and for the first time, you begin choosing people from strength instead of emptiness. That's where real freedom begins. The wrong relationship doesn't just break your heart, it rewrites your life. And maybe that's the part nobody warns you about. The wrong relationship rarely destroys you all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. At first, you only compromise a little. You ignore one disrespectful comment, one red flag, one moment where your intuition quietly whispers, something feels wrong here. But you stay, because loneliness still scares you more than dysfunction, so you rationalize it. Maybe they're just stressed. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe love is supposed to feel hard. And little by little, you begin negotiating with your own peace. That's how self-betrayal begins, not through one dramatic moment, but through tiny compromises repeated for too long. Your standards slowly soften, your boundaries slowly disappear, your emotional exhaustion slowly becomes normal, until one day, you wake up and realize, I don't even feel like myself anymore. That's the danger of attachment built on fear. It doesn't just break your heart, it rewrites your identity. The Stoics believed that a person must protect their inner world carefully, because once chaos enters the mind repeatedly, the soul eventually adapts to it, and that's exactly what happens in unhealthy relationships. At first, the emotional instability shocks you, the mixed signals, the inconsistency, the emotional hot and cold behavior, but eventually, you become accustomed to the chaos. You start calling anxiety love. You call emotional exhaustion passion. You call overthinking caring deeply. And slowly, peace begins to feel unfamiliar. That's terrifying when you really think about it. How many people are secretly addicted to emotional chaos, simply because calmness feels empty to them now? How many people mistake emotional intensity for genuine connection? How many people are staying in relationships that drain their spirit, just because they no longer remember what inner peace feels like? That's why solitude matters more than people realize. Solitude resets you, it reminds your nervous system what life feels like without constant emotional survival. No walking on eggshells, no checking someone's tone for hidden meaning, no anxiety every time a message feels colder than usual, just silence, just clarity, just space to breathe again. And strangely, at first, that peace can feel uncomfortable, because chaos is addictive. When someone spends years emotionally overstimulated, stillness almost feels wrong. That's why so many people return to relationships they know are hurting them, not because they were happy there, but because pain had become familiar, and familiar feels safe, even when it's destroying you. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, You have power over your mind, not outside events. But emotional dependence gives that power away. Now your peace depends on someone else's attention, your mood depends on their consistency, your self-worth depends on how loved they make you feel that day, and that's a terrifying way to live, because the moment another person controls your emotional stability, fear enters everything. One delayed text creates anxiety, one cold reply ruins the night, one moment of distance feels like abandonment. That's not love, that's emotional captivity disguised as romance. Real love should make your life feel lighter, not like a constant emotional emergency, and maybe that's the question more people need to ask themselves: does this relationship bring me peace, or does it only distract me from loneliness? Because those are not the same thing. A person can hold your hand and still drain your soul. A person can text you every day and still leave you emotionally starving. That's why being single is sometimes the healthiest thing a person can experience, not because isolation is the goal, but because distance creates perspective, and perspective changes everything. When you finally step away from constant emotional noise, you begin hearing yourself again, your real thoughts, your real values, your real desires, not the version shaped around someone else's approval, and slowly, something beautiful begins to happen. You stop asking, "How do I keep someone from leaving?" and start asking, "Why was I willing to abandon myself just to make someone stay?" That question changes people, because the moment you value your peace more than temporary companionship, you stop settling for relationships that quietly destroy your spirit, and for the first time in a very long time, you begin choosing yourself again. The day you learn to enjoy your own company, everything changes, and maybe that's the real turning point, not the day someone loves you, not the day someone chooses you, but the day you sit alone, and realize your peace no longer depends on anyone else being there, because most people have never truly experienced that kind of peace. They've experienced distraction, noise, attention, temporary comfort, but peace, real peace, that's rare, especially in a world where silence makes people uncomfortable. Look around, the moment people are alone, they immediately reach for something: their phone, music, social media, dating apps, conversations that mean nothing, anything to avoid sitting quietly with themselves. Why? Because solitude exposes everything: the insecurities, the unresolved wounds, the fear of not feeling important, the emptiness people spend years trying to outrun. And that's why being single feels painful at first, not because solitude is bad, but because it removes distractions. For the first time in a long time, you hear your own thoughts clearly, and honestly, that can feel terrifying. There are nights when the silence feels heavier than heartbreak itself. No messages, no emotional stimulation, no one checking if you made it home, just you, alone with your own mind. And maybe that's why so many people run back to unhealthy relationships, not because they were truly happy there, but because silence reveals things distraction hides. It reveals exhaustion, emptiness, dependency, the parts of yourself you abandoned while trying to feel loved. But if you stay in that silence long enough, something begins to shift. Your nervous system slowly calms down, your thoughts become clearer, your emotions stop reacting to every little thing, and one morning, you wake up, make coffee slowly, open the window, and realize something strange. Peace feels different when nobody is draining you anymore. No anxiety, no emotional confusion, no checking your phone every 5 minutes, wondering if someone still cares. Just quiet, just breathing, just life. That moment changes people, because slowly, instead of fearing your own company, you begin enjoying it. And once a person truly enjoys their own presence, desperation disappears. They stop chasing attention from people who barely value them. They stop lowering their standards just to feel chosen. They stop tolerating emotional confusion in exchange for temporary companionship. Why? Because they already discovered something most people never do. Being alone is not the same as being lonely. That realization alone can transform an entire life. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things important to you." And that's why some people feel empty even inside relationships, because another person cannot save you from disconnection with yourself. Only self-awareness can do that. Only solitude can reveal that. Think about how powerful it is to genuinely enjoy your own life again. You take yourself out for coffee without feeling awkward. You walk alone without needing distraction. You spend a quiet evening reading, creating, training, or simply thinking, and it feels peaceful instead of empty. That's freedom, and ironically, that's when people become the most attractive, not because they try harder, but because they stop radiating emotional hunger. There's a calmness to people who are comfortable alone, a steadiness, a quiet confidence. You can feel it immediately. They don't force conversations, they don't beg for reassurance, they don't panic when someone pulls away, because their emotional center is no longer outside themselves, it's within them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." Most people spend their lives searching for peace in other people, without realizing peace was supposed to be built internally first. And maybe that's the deeper lesson of solitude. It teaches you how to stop abandoning yourself, because when someone fears being alone, they tolerate almost anything: disrespect, mixed signals, emotional neglect, false promises. But when someone genuinely enjoys their own company, they become very difficult to manipulate, because now relationships are no longer emotional survival, they become a choice, and that changes everything. You stop asking, "Will they stay?" and start asking, "Do they deserve access to my peace?" That's a completely different mindset, and honestly, that mindset saves people from years of suffering, because the truth is, a person who cannot enjoy their own company will always hand too much power to people who give them attention. But a person who has learned peace in solitude, they carry that peace everywhere, even when people leave, even when life changes, even when love ends. And that kind of inner stability is rarer than love itself. When you stop needing validation, you become free. And maybe this is where everything finally begins to change, because after solitude teaches you how to enjoy your own company, another battle quietly appears: the need for validation. And most people don't realize how deeply controlled they are by it. They think they want love, but often, what they really want is reassurance. Reassurance that they matter, that they're attractive enough, interesting enough, important enough. That's why one compliment can make them feel alive, and one cold response can quietly ruin their entire week. Their self-worth rises and falls based on attention, based on reactions, based on whether someone chooses them. And think about how dangerous that is. The moment your value depends on someone else's approval, you become emotionally controllable. Now your mood belongs to whoever gives or withholds attention. A delayed text suddenly creates anxiety, a dry reply feels like rejection, silence becomes panic, and slowly, you stop living naturally. You start performing, performing to be liked, performing to be desired, performing to avoid abandonment. You over-explain yourself, you say yes when you mean no, you hide parts of your personality just to stay accepted, and eventually, you become disconnected from who you really are. That's the hidden cost of validation addiction. It quietly steals authenticity. Epictetus warned about this centuries ago. He said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. In other words, stop building your life around other people's opinions, because the person who constantly needs approval can never truly be free, and relationships often expose this weakness brutally. You can actually watch it happen. Someone enters a relationship confident and independent, then slowly, they begin adjusting everything, their appearance, their schedule, their dreams, their personality, not because they genuinely changed, but because they're terrified of no longer being wanted. That fear quietly controls millions of people every single day, and honestly it exhausts them, because pretending is exhausting, constantly monitoring someone's mood is exhausting, trying to remain lovable 24 hours a day is exhausting. That's why so many people feel emotionally drained inside relationships that were supposed to make them happy. They're no longer resting inside the relationship, they're managing it, performing inside it, surviving inside it. But solitude changes this, because when you spend enough time alone, you slowly stop needing constant reassurance from the outside world. At first, it feels uncomfortable. You post something, and nobody reacts, you disappear for a while, and life keeps moving, and strangely, that hurts the ego, because the ego wants proof that it matters. But then, another realization quietly appears, a calmer one, a stronger one. You begin understanding that your worth never depended on attention in the first place, and that realization is powerful, because now, you no longer need to chase people for validation, you no longer need to force conversations, you no longer panic when someone loses interest, you stop asking, how do I make them choose me? And begin asking, why am I trying so hard to convince someone to see my value? That question changes people, because the truth is, the strongest people are not the ones constantly admired, they're the ones who remain themselves even when nobody is watching. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Look within, within is the fountain of good. Not in applause, not in approval, not in being desired, within." And maybe that's why solitude becomes such a powerful teacher. It teaches you how to build identity internally, instead of socially. It teaches you how to stand in silence without collapsing, to enjoy your life without needing an audience, to feel worthy without constant reassurance. And once someone reaches that point, their entire energy changes. They stop radiating emotional hunger, they stop clinging, they stop begging emotionally. There's a calmness to people who validate themselves, a grounded presence, a quiet power, because now, if love enters their life, beautiful; if it leaves, painful, but survivable, their identity remains intact either way. And honestly, that's probably one of the deepest freedoms a human being can experience, to no longer need constant proof that you are enough, because you finally know it yourself. The most dangerous relationship is the one that makes you abandon yourself. There's a kind of heartbreak nobody talks about enough, not the heartbreak of losing someone, but the heartbreak of slowly losing yourself, while trying to keep them. And honestly, that pain cuts deeper than most people realize, because it doesn't happen suddenly, it happens quietly, almost invisibly. At first, you only change small things, you become a little more careful with your words, a little quieter, a little less honest about what you truly feel. You stop bringing up things that upset them, stop expressing needs that feel too much. Stop showing parts of yourself that might create conflict, and every compromise seems tiny in the moment, almost harmless, until one day, you look at your own life, and barely recognize the person living it. That's the terrifying thing about emotional dependence, it can make people betray themselves, without even noticing. And the worst part, sometimes the relationship doesn't even look toxic from the outside. There are no dramatic betrayals, no screaming matches, no obvious cruelty, just a slow emotional erosion, a constant feeling that you must become less to keep the connection alive, and millions of people are living like that right now, smiling in photos, replying, "I'm fine," pretending they're happy, while internally, they feel disconnected from who they used to be. Maybe you felt that before. Maybe there was a season where your entire emotional state depended on one person. One text could make you feel alive. One cold reply could ruin your entire night. You checked your phone constantly, overanalyzed every message, read emotional distance like a warning sign, and slowly, your peace stopped belonging to you. It belonged to them. That's not love, that's emotional surrender. And the frightening part is, people often call this deep connection. But real love should never require self-abandonment. The Stoics believed that inner peace should never be placed entirely in someone else's hands, because people change, feelings change, life changes, and if your identity is built completely around another person, what happens when they leave? That's the question most people avoid asking themselves, because deep down, they already know the answer. They know they've built their emotional world around someone temporary, and maybe that's why breakups destroy some people so completely, not because they lost love, but because they lost the version of themselves that only existed inside that relationship. There's a story about a man who spent years trying to keep someone from leaving him. He changed everything for her, his routines, his hobbies, his priorities. He stopped seeing friends as much, stopped chasing the dreams he once cared about. Even his personality became softer, smaller, more acceptable, and every compromise felt tiny at first, until one day, she still left, and after the relationship ended, he sat alone in his apartment, staring at the silence around him, realizing something terrifying. He didn't know who he was anymore. That moment breaks people, not because of loneliness, but because they suddenly realize, I spent so much time trying not to lose someone else, that I completely lost myself. And honestly, how many people are secretly living that exact story right now? How many people are abandoning their truth just to maintain attachment? How many people are staying in emotionally exhausted relationships because they fear starting over? That's why solitude matters more than most people understand. Solitude reconnects you with yourself. It strips away performance, the masks, the emotional dependency, the constant need to be chosen, and slowly, you begin remembering who you were before fear took over. You remember what genuinely excites you, what calms you, what matters to you, and one day, you notice something small but powerful. You stop checking your phone every 5 minutes, you stop needing reassurance to feel okay, you laugh more easily, sleep more peacefully, and suddenly you realize, healing happened quietly, not through another relationship, not through attention, but through finally returning to yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "A rock is not disturbed by the wind. It stands firm." That's the kind of emotional stability solitude can build, not coldness, not isolation, stability, the ability to love someone deeply, without disappearing inside them. And maybe that's the real goal, not avoiding love, not becoming emotionally numb, but learning how to love, without self-destruction, to care deeply, without abandoning your peace, to open your heart, without handing someone ownership of your identity, because the truth is, the right relationship will never require you to betray yourself, to keep it alive. And the moment you finally understand that, you stop chasing people who only love the version of you that stays small. The people who fear being alone often settle for almost anything, and maybe that's the saddest part of all. Not that people get hurt, not that relationships end, but that so many people spend years accepting less than they deserve, simply because they're terrified of starting over alone, Think about how many relationships survive, only because fear is stronger than honesty. People stay even when the connection is already dead, even when conversations feel empty, even when affection becomes routine instead of real, even when they secretly feel lonely, lying beside someone every night. Why? Because loneliness inside a relationship somehow feels safer than loneliness alone. At least someone is there, at least the silence is covered, at least they can pretend everything is okay. And honestly, that illusion traps millions of people for years. The Stoics believed that fear is one of the greatest prisons a human being can live inside, and fear of loneliness. That prison is invisible, because society reinforces it constantly. From childhood, people are taught, you need someone. Someone to complete you, someone to validate you, someone to make life meaningful. So when relationships fail, people don't just feel heartbreak, they feel failure, as if being alone automatically means something is wrong with them. But what if the opposite is true? What if many people are suffering, not because they're alone, but because they refuse to be alone long enough to heal? That question changes everything, because healing requires silence, reflection, distance, and most people never stay still long enough for that process to happen. Instead, they rush another relationship, another attachment, another temporary emotional escape, like putting bandages over wounds that were never cleaned properly, and eventually, those wounds begin shaping every future relationship they touch. That's why unresolved loneliness becomes dangerous. A person who fears being alone often becomes willing to tolerate things they normally never would: disrespect, emotional inconsistency, manipulation, half-love, because deep down, they're no longer protecting their peace, they're protecting attachment, and attachment built on fear always leads to suffering. There's a reason some people ignore obvious red flags. It's not because they don't see them, it's because loneliness feels more frightening than dysfunction, so they convince themselves, maybe things will change. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe this is just what love feels like. But deep inside, their intuition already knows the truth. There's a quiet exhaustion that comes from forcing yourself to stay where your spirit no longer feels safe, and eventually, the body notices too: the constant anxiety, the emotional overthinking, the heaviness, the loss of motivation, because the soul was never designed to live in survival mode forever. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes colored with the color of its thoughts." Imagine what happens when someone spends years thinking, "Please don't leave me." That fear slowly becomes their emotional identity, and people can feel it, because fear changes energy. It creates clinginess, over-explaining, over-giving, over-tolerating, a constant emotional hunger. But when someone learns how to stand comfortably alone, everything changes. They stop negotiating their dignity for companionship, they stop trying to earn basic respect, they stop confusing attention with genuine care, and for the first time, they begin understanding something powerful: it is far better to feel lonely alone, than to feel lonely beside someone who slowly destroys your peace. That realization frees people, because now relationships stop becoming emotional rescue missions, they become choices, conscious choices, healthy choices, not desperate attempts to avoid silence. And maybe that's why solitude is so transformative. It teaches you that loneliness itself will not destroy you, but abandoning yourself absolutely will. There's a quiet confidence that appears in people who no longer fear being alone. You can hear it in the way they speak, see it in the way they walk away from disrespect calmly, feel it in the way they no longer chase people who pull away, because now, they understand something. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Being chosen by the wrong person is not success, and being alone is not failure. Sometimes, Being alone is the first honest thing a person has done in years, and maybe the reason solitude hurts so much at first is because it introduces you to the version of yourself you abandoned while trying to be loved. The strongest people are not emotionally cold, they're emotionally free, and maybe this is the misunderstanding that changes everything. People see someone who enjoys solitude, someone who protects their peace, someone who no longer chases attention, and they assume that person became cold, detached, emotionless, but that's not true. The strongest people are not emotionally numb, they simply stop depending on others to feel whole. That's a completely different kind of strength, because emotional freedom does not mean, I don't care about anyone. It means, I care deeply, without losing myself in the process. And honestly, that balance is rare. Most people swing between two extremes, they either become emotionally dependent, or emotionally unavailable, they cling too tightly, or build walls so high that nobody can truly reach them. But emotional maturity lives somewhere in the middle, calm, grounded, open-hearted, without becoming emotionally enslaved. The Stoics understood this deeply. They were never teaching people to stop loving, they were teaching people how to love, without attachment destroying their peace. Marcus Aurelius cared deeply about people, but he also understood something powerful: anything you cannot emotionally survive losing, eventually gains control over you. That includes relationships, that includes approval, that includes attachment itself. And maybe that's why so many people suffer in love, not because they care too much, but because they lose themselves completely inside what they care about. There's a difference between loving someone and building your entire emotional stability around them. One is connection, the other is dependence, and dependence always creates fear: fear of abandonment, fear of replacement, fear of not being enough. And fear changes people, it makes them overreact emotionally, overanalyze tiny changes in energy, become anxious over silence, read distance as rejection, and slowly, love stops feeling peaceful, it starts feeling like survival. But emotionally free people move differently, not because they don't feel emotions, but because they are no longer controlled by them. They can love someone deeply and still maintain inner stability. They can experience heartbreak without collapsing entirely. They can miss someone without abandoning themselves trying to get them back. That's strength, real strength. And honestly, you can feel the difference immediately. When you meet someone emotionally free, there's a calmness to them, a quiet certainty. They don't force connections, they don't beg for reassurance constantly, they don't panic when space appears. Why? Because their identity is no longer built around being chosen, it's built internally. That changes everything. There's a story about an old Stoic teacher, whose student once asked, "How do I stop fearing loss in relationships?" And the teacher replied, "By building a life so deeply rooted within yourself, that no person becomes your entire foundation." That's powerful when you really think about it, because most people enter relationships hoping to be saved from emptiness, but emotionally free people, they enter relationships already whole. They don't ask, "Please complete me." They say, "I want to share this life with you," without either of us losing ourselves. That creates a completely different kind of love, a calmer love, a healthier love, a love without constant emotional bargaining. And maybe that's the irony: the people who are least desperate for love often become the most capable of giving it, because now their love is no longer driven by fear, it's driven by choice, not attachment, not loneliness, not emotional hunger, choice. That's why solitude can become such a powerful teacher. It teaches you how to emotionally stand on your own feet, how to calm yourself, validate yourself, carry yourself through difficult seasons. And once you learn that, You stop approaching relationships like emotional life rafts. You stop trying to extract identity from other people. You stop fearing silence so intensely, and one day, you notice something strange. You no longer need to win every argument. You no longer feel anxious when someone takes longer to reply. You no longer chase people who become distant, because your peace is no longer hanging from someone else's behavior. It belongs to you now. That's emotional freedom, and for the first time in your life, love becomes something beautiful again, not a hiding place, not an addiction, not a desperate attempt to escape yourself, just two whole people, walking beside each other freely, and honestly, that kind of love is much rarer than passion, because it requires something most people never develop, inner peace before attachment, and maybe that's why so many people stay trapped in cycles of painful relationships. They keep searching for someone to save them, without first learning how to emotionally save themselves. But the moment you finally do, the entire world changes, because now, you can love deeply, without fear controlling your heart, and that might be the highest form of freedom a person can ever reach. Part 8. Maybe love was never supposed to save you. Maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside all of this. Maybe being single was never the punishment people made it seem to be. Maybe it was the pause your soul desperately needed, the silence, the distance, the space to finally hear yourself again, after years of emotional noise. Because at some point, most people become so focused on being loved, that they forget to build a life they actually love living. They chase connection, while feeling disconnected from themselves. They search for someone to complete them, without ever asking why they feel incomplete in the first place, and maybe that's why solitude feels so uncomfortable at first, because for the first time, there's nowhere left to run, no distractions, no emotional escape, no one there to temporarily silence the emptiness, just you, your thoughts, your fears, your wounds, your truth, and honestly, that's where real transformation begins, not when someone finally chooses you, but when you stop abandoning yourself, just to be chosen. That changes everything, because once you learn how to sit peacefully with yourself, you stop settling for relationships that disturb your soul. You stop begging for attention that should come naturally. You stop mistaking emotional chaos for love, and slowly, you begin understanding something most people spend their entire lives searching for. Peace feels better than constant emotional uncertainty. The Stoics believed that the strongest life is built from within, not from status, not from attention, not from relationships, but from self-mastery, inner stability, a calm mind that does not collapse every time life changes. And maybe that's what solitude was trying to teach you all along: how to become emotionally whole before sharing yourself with another person. Because love was never supposed to become your identity, it was supposed to become an addition to an identity you already built. That's the difference. A relationship should not rescue your life, it should complement a life already rooted in peace. And maybe the most powerful thing a person can say is not, "Please don't leave me," but, "I will be okay even if you do." Not because they stopped caring, but because they finally stopped abandoning themselves. That's emotional freedom, that's inner peace, that's strength. And strangely, once people reach that level of peace, they often stop chasing love so desperately, because now they understand, love is beautiful, but losing yourself trying to keep it is not. So if you're in a season of solitude right now, don't rush to escape it, don't numb it, don't immediately fill it with noise, just because silence feels unfamiliar. Sit with it, learn from it, grow inside it, because maybe the season is not empty at all. Maybe this is the season where you finally meet yourself fully, without distraction, Maybe the reason solitude hurts so much is because it introduces you to the version of yourself you abandoned while trying to be loved, and maybe the person you've been searching for this entire time was never someone else. Maybe it was the version of you that existed before fear took over, before validation controlled your choices, before loneliness convinced you to settle for less than peace. So tonight, ask yourself honestly, if nobody came to save you, could you still build a life? You're proud to wake up to that question alone, might quietly change the rest of your life, and if this message spoke to something deep inside you, then this journey is only beginning. Subscribe to the channel, and walk this path with us, not toward becoming cold, not toward becoming distant, but toward becoming peaceful, whole, and emotionally free. Thank you for spending these moments here. Truly, in a world full of noise, distractions, and shallow connections, the fact that you stayed long enough to reflect deeply means more than you know. And remember this: you are not incomplete because you are alone. You were never half of a person to begin with.